All right, so you're looking into Just Dial,
Hmm.
and you want to really get a handle on their recent financial performance.
Yeah.
You sent over some really interesting stuff, actually. Filings from stock exchanges, reports from independent auditors, and even some analyst insights.
Oh,
We're going to try to break all that down for you today.
yeah, that's great. It's a really good set of information to kind of get a clear picture of where they stand.
Yeah, definitely. So, just a quick reminder for anyone who might need it. Just Dial is like the leading local search engine in India,
Hmm.
but they've actually expanded quite a bit from their early days.
Oh, absolutely. They're not just a website anymore.
Right.
They've got apps for your phone, a
Mm.
mobile-friendly site, and even voice and text search.
Wow.
They're really covering just about every way someone might want to search these days.
Yeah, they really are. And they're all over India too, right?
Right? Not just the big cities.
Yeah.
They have a huge employee base.
Hmm.
I mean, we're talking thousands of PIN codes across the country. But there's this really fascinating detail in their filings. About 70% of their revenue comes from just the top 11 cities. So
Wow.
while they're nationwide, they're definitely strongest in those major metropolitan areas.
Yeah, that makes sense when you think about it, right?
Mm.
Businesses in those big cities, they really need to stand out. And Just Dial is how a lot of people find them.
Right.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Let's look at the numbers. Starting with the December 2023 quarterly results.
Okay.
I noticed their standalone profit was about 330 million rupees, and the consolidated profit was almost 360 million.
Yeah, and their operating profit for that quarter,
Right.
both standalone and consolidated,
Right.
was really strong too.
Yeah.
Tells me they're managing their costs well.
Okay, good. Now, this is where things get interesting for me. They reported this significant other income of about 675 million rupees.
Yeah.
That's a big chunk of change. What exactly contributes to other income for a company like Just Dial?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something we should try to understand other income for. Just Style includes things like gains on their financial investments
Uh-huh.
and profits from the sale of some of their investments.
All right.
But it's important to remember that this kind of income can be a little unpredictable.
So it might not be there consistently every quarter.
Exactly. It's something to keep in mind as we're looking at their performance over time.
Okay, makes sense. Shall we move on to their March 2024 year-end results?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Wow. Their standalone profit for the entire year was a whopping 1.63 billion rupees.
Wow.
And their consolidated profit was even higher at 1.65 billion rupees.
Yeah.
Definitely making money. But I also noticed they brought in two new independent directors during this time, Professor Deepak Jain and Mr. Krishnan Sudarshan.
Yeah, their backgrounds are really impressive.
Yeah.
Professor Jain was the dean at Kellogg and in Seed.
Wow.
And Mr. Sudarshan has a ton of experience in executive search and board consulting.
Okay.
I'm really curious to see what they bring to the table.
Yeah. What kind of impact do you think they could have on Just Dial's strategy going forward?
Well, bringing in people with that kind of experience could signal a shift towards even more ambitious growth plans.
Okay.
You know, Professor Jain's academic background and experience working with all these successful companies
Yeah.
might bring a really unique perspective to Just Dial's decision-making.
Okay, interesting. Okay, on to their June 2024 quarterly results.
Right.
Their revenue kept growing at a good pace,
Yeah.
and their operating profit jumped up too.
Mm-hmm.
But they also dissolved their subsidiary MYJD Private Limited during this quarter. What do you make of that decision?
It's not totally clear from these sources why they dissolved MYJD.
Yeah.
But sometimes divesting parts of a business can really streamline operations
Right.
and allow them to focus more on their core areas.
Makes sense. Okay, let's jump to their September 2024 half-year and quarterly reports.
Okay.
They continued to see both profit and revenue growth. Their half-year standalone profit was about 1.54 billion rupees, and the consolidated profit was a bit over 2.95 billion rupees.
Wow.
They also issued additional equity shares during this time.
Yeah, issuing those additional shares is really interesting because it suggests they're looking for capital, maybe to fund new projects or even acquisitions.
Right.
And then we see that other income showing up again in these reports, mainly from gains on financial instruments and the sale of investments.
Okay, so based on these reports, it seems like they're doing well financially. But one of the sources you sent over was a report from the analyst platform Screener.
Yeah,
And they had some interesting points.
it did.
What did they say?
Well, Screener highlighted one major pro for Just Dial. The company is almost completely debt-free.
That's a big deal. Having that flexibility is a huge advantage for any company.
Absolutely. But Screener also pointed out a few cons to consider.
Okay, like what?
First, they haven't been paying dividends, even though they've
Hmm.
consistently been turning a profit.
That's a little strange. Why wouldn't they share some of those profits with their shareholders?
Well, it's not unheard of. Some companies choose to retain earnings to reinvest in the business,
Right.
especially if they see big growth opportunities ahead.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something investors will want to consider.
Okay, what other cons did they highlight?
Well, they mentioned Just Dial's relatively low return on equity.
Uh-huh.
And as we've already talked about, a large part of their earnings comes from that other income category, which we know can fluctuate.
Right. So what do you think? Are these cons like major red flags or just things to kind of keep an eye on?
I think it really depends on your individual investment goals and how much risk you're comfortable with.
Okay.
Personally, I'd want to investigate those a little further.
Yeah.
The lack of dividends and the lower return on equity would give me pause.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that they're virtually debt-free
Mm-hmm.
and have such a strong position in a growing market,
Right.
those are big positives.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds like we need to dig a little deeper. Now, this next part caught my eye. It involves a land dispute Just Dial had in Karnataka.
Oh yeah, the KADB case.
Yeah.
It really highlights how events that seem totally unrelated can have a big impact on a company's financials.
So Just Dial initially had 15 acres of land in Bengaluru allotted to them by KADB,
Right.
the Karnataka Industrial Area Development Board.
Uh-huh.
But then KADB decided to just cancel the lease.
Yeah, and of course Just Dial fought back in court.
Yeah.
They initially lost their case, but then they appealed the decision
Oh, wow.
and ultimately got a refund of what they had paid for the land.
That's quite a turnaround. But how does all this connect back to their financial statements?
Well, if you look at their December 2023 statement, you can see the land was written down
Uh-huh.
because of that initial loss in court.
Yeah.
But after winning their appeal,
Right.
they were able to reverse that write-down in later statements.
It just goes to show how legal battles can add this, like, uncertainty to a company's financial position.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that the footnotes and disclosures in financial statements are really important.
Yeah.
They can reveal a lot that's not immediately obvious on the surface.
So we've looked at Just Dial's revenue and profit growth, their almost debt-free status, and even this fascinating story of the land dispute.
Yeah, and we've seen how they're expanding beyond their core business, bringing on new expertise, and potentially even looking at acquisitions.
It'll be interesting to see what they do next.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's continue our deep dive into Just Dial's financial performance in part 2. We'll analyze their results further and talk about what it all might mean for investors like you. Stay tuned.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Just Dial's financial performance. You know, as we're going through all of this, one thing that really stands out to me is just how adaptable this company is.
Oh, yeah. They've really embraced change. I mean, think about it. They went from like a traditional phone-based directory
Right.
to this multi-platform local search engine. That's a huge shift.
It really is. They really seem to understand that, the future was in mobile and online search. And they've put a lot of effort into building a strong presence there.
Yeah, and that's like a key takeaway for any business, really.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to adapt and innovate if you want to stay relevant.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of innovation, it's interesting to see how Just Dial is using their financial resources to kind of explore these new growth opportunities. Their March 2024 cash flow statement shows a significant amount spent on investments, over 10 billion rupees.
Yeah.
Do we have any insight into where that money went?
Unfortunately, the statement doesn't break down the specifics,
Okay.
but I think it's safe to assume they're actively seeking out ways to expand, possibly even acquire other companies.
Yeah, given their dominant position in local search, acquisitions could be a really smart move.
Right.
They could enter new markets or add services that complement what they already offer.
Exactly. It's almost like they're building an ecosystem around local search,
Right.
connecting consumers and businesses in more and more ways.
So acquisitions are one potential avenue for growth. What else are they focusing on?
Well, let's not forget about their core business.
Yeah.
They're constantly refining those search algorithms,
Mm.
improving the user experience, and adding new features to their platforms.
Right. And all of that is likely contributing to their consistently increasing revenue.
Yeah, it shows they're not just resting on their laurels.
Right.
They're actively trying to make their services even better to attract more users.
It's a smart strategy. They're investing in both their existing business and exploring new opportunities for growth.
Yeah,
It seems like a pretty solid approach for long-term success.
definitely. And it makes them an interesting company to watch.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to take calculated risks and push boundaries in the local search space.
Okay, Now let's go back to their management team for a second.
Okay.
We talked about the two new independent directors they brought on board, Professor Jain and Mr. Sudarshan. What sort of impact do you think their experience will have on the board?
Well, I think Professor Jain's academic background and experience working at top business schools could bring a fresh perspective to Just Dial's strategic decision-making.
Yeah.
He's likely seeing firsthand how successful companies navigate change and adapt to different market conditions.
Right. And Mr. Sudarshan's experience with board consulting and executive search could be valuable as they grow and evolve their leadership team.
Oh, for sure.
He probably has a keen sense of what makes for strong leadership in today's business world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The combination of their experience and expertise could really help guide Just Dial towards greater success.
Now let's talk about something investors always pay attention to: dividends.
Yeah.
We know that Just Dial has consistently reported profits,
Right.
but they haven't paid dividends to shareholders in recent years.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they want to reward their investors?
Well, there could be a few reasons. One possibility is that they believe reinvesting those profits back into growth initiatives
Yeah.
will create more value for shareholders in the long run. And considering their significant investment activities, this seems plausible.
Yeah, that makes sense. But some investors might still prefer to see at least a portion of those profits returned to them directly.
Oh, of course. It's a legitimate concern for investors.
Right.
And the lack of dividends could indicate the company is prioritizing aggressive growth over shareholder returns in the near term.
We also learned from Screener that Just Dial's return on equity has been relatively low.
Right, and that's a metric that investors will definitely want to consider.
Yeah.
A low return on equity might mean they aren't using shareholder investments as efficiently as they could be.
So essentially, they aren't generating as much profit for each dollar invested by shareholders.
Exactly. While their minimal debt might partially offset this concern,
Yeah.
it's still something to think about.
So we've looked at Just Dial's impressive adaptability and their commitment to finding new avenues for growth.
Yeah.
We discussed their significant investments in both their core business and potential acquisitions. We analyzed the potential influence of their new board members and considered the implications of their dividend policy and their return on equity.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. Just Dial seems to be a company that embraces evolution and is constantly striving for growth.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into Just Dial's financial performance. We've covered a lot of ground, from their impressive revenue growth to their investments, and even those new board members. Now it's time to kind of bring it all together.
Yeah, exactly. We've looked at a lot of different pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and now we want to give you some key takeaways
Right.
for you to consider as you're evaluating Just Dial.
Okay, so what's the big picture here? What does it all mean for someone who's listening and trying to get a sense of Just Dial's overall financial health?
Well, the first thing that really stands out is their consistent profitability.
Right.
I mean, they've been in the black for years,
Yeah,
and those profits just continue to grow.
it's impressive.
It really is. It says a lot about their strong position in the market,
Mhm.
their ability to adapt to changing consumer behavior,
Right.
and their efficient management.
But, we also uncovered some things that might give investors pause.
Right. Those are important to consider as well.
Right.
The reliance on other income, for example.
Yeah.
And the fact that their return on equity has been relatively low.
Right.
Those factors might be concerning for some investors who are looking for more predictable earnings and, a more efficient use of capital.
On the other hand, we can't forget that they're practically debt-free.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Gives them so much flexibility.
It does. And their strategic investments, including the possibility of acquisitions, suggest that they're not just thinking about today.
Right?
They're focused on the long term.
Exactly. It's interesting.
Yeah.
They seem to be balancing that profitability with expansion.
Yeah.
They're not just milking their current success.
Yeah.
They're looking for ways to build for the future.
And with those new independent directors bringing their expertise to the board, it's going to be fascinating to see how their strategy evolves over the next few years.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So if someone is thinking about investing in Just Dial, what are the key things they should keep in mind?
Well, I think their consistent profitability and strong market position are definitely big points in their favor.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
But it's crucial to also weigh those other factors we discussed.
Yeah.
The lack of dividends, the lower return on equity, and that reliance on other income.
Right.
It really comes down to deciding if their growth strategy aligns with your own investment goals
Right.
and your tolerance for risk.
It's a personal decision.
It is.
Yeah.
So we've explored their successes, the potential challenges, and what the future might hold for them.
Right. Hopefully this deep dive gives you a clearer picture of Just Dial's financial performance.
And as with any investment decision, do your own thorough research is always recommended.
Now, here's a final thought for you to consider as you continue your research. Just Dial has this incredible dominance in local search, and India's economy is becoming increasingly digital.
Right.
Could they become an acquisition target for a larger tech company?
Wow. That's a great question. It wasn't something we saw in the sources you provided.
Right.
It's definitely something to think about. A move like that would significantly change the Indian tech landscape.
It really would. It just goes to show that Just Dial is a company worth watching closely.
Definitely.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Just Dial.
Keep learning, keep exploring, and as always, keep diving deep.